Section 4. Neurons become one with life. Damasio's claim here is that this ensemble of loop circuits constitutes a dynamic bonded unit which enacts a functional fusion of body states and perceptual state. He says, quote, "Neurons in charge of conveying to the brain signals about the body's interior would have such an intimate association with interior structures that the signals conveyed would not be merely about the states of the flesh, but literally extensions of the flesh. Neurons would imitate life so thoroughly that they would become one with it. In brief, in the complex interconnectivity of these brainstem nuclei, one would find the beginning of an explanation for why feelings, in this case primordial feelings, feel like something." End quote. In attempting to explain the origin of subjective feelings in large multicelled creatures like us, Damasio appeals to the sensory capacities of single-celled organisms. Quote, "Unicellular organisms are sensitive to threatening intrusions. Poke an amoeba and it will shrink away from the poke. Poke a paramecium and it will swim away from the poke. We can observe such behaviors and are comfortable to describe them as attitudes, knowing full well that the cells do not know what they are doing in the sense that we know what we do when we evade a threat. But what about the other side of this behavior, namely the cell's internal state? The cell does not have a brain, let alone a mind, to feel the pokes, and yet it responds because something changed in its interior." End quote. Damasio calls these aspects of cell life the forerunners of a feeling function. These characteristics of single cells, Damasio states, can be transposed to neurons. Quote, "Therein could reside the physical state whose modulation and amplification via larger and larger circuits of cells could yield a proto-feeling." End quote. In other words, subjective feelings may start in any of the body's trillion or so individual cells and then be amplified via the nervous system to organism level. Damasio refers to the fact that neurons are differentiations of other living cells to support this idea. Despite having a specialized function, neurons, like all other body cells, are organically similar. Damasio specifically denies that neurons can be reduced to simple electromechanical microchips. Neurons, like all living cells, have more complex response capabilities, which, as above, he describes as cellular attitudes. He suggests that neurons have inherent sensitivity or irritability, and he cites Rodolfo Linas, who has proposed that feelings which arise from the specialized sensory functions of neurons can be scaled up to large neuronal circuits. Damasio uses as an example the will to live, which we feel ourselves to possess. He suggests that this is built up from the attitudes of numerous single cells joined cooperatively in an organism. Quote, such an idea draws on the notion of the summing up of cellular contributions. Large numbers of muscle cells join forces literally by contracting simultaneously and produce a major singular and focused force, end quote. And Damasio proposes that this could work in a similar way for subjective feelings, such as our consciously experienced will to live. Damasio points out the intriguing nuances of the concept of cellular attitudes. He says that the specialization of neurons comes mainly from the fact that neurons, like muscle cells, are excitable. Their excitability derives from the fact that the neuron's cell membrane is permeable for charged ions, which make up nerve impulses. Damasio cites N.D. Cook, who suggests that, quote, the temporary but repeated opening up of the cell membranes is a violation of the nearly hermetic seal that protects life in the neuron's interior, and that such vulnerability would be a good candidate for the creation of a moment of proto-feeling. I am by no means affirming that this is how feelings arise, but I regard this line of inquiry as worth pursuing, end quote. Damasio notes, however, that these ideas should not be confused with efforts to locate the origins of consciousness at the level of neurons based on quantum effects. Very much in line with Panksepp, Damasio observes that, for evolutionary reasons, perceptual maps of the body ought to generate subjective feelings. Quote, if perceptual maps of the body are to be effective in leading an organism toward avoidance of pain and seeking of pleasure, they should not only feel like something, they actually ought to feel like something, end quote. He suggests that pain and pleasure states appeared early in evolution, probably before the development of brains or even nervous systems. He suggests that early in evolution, quote, unbrained organisms already had well-defined body states that necessarily corresponded to what we came to experience as pain and pleasure. The arrival of nervous systems would have spelled a way of portraying such states, end quote. I think that this is an extension of Damasio's proposal that feelings originate inside single cells. As primitive nerve cells evolved, which when excited opened their membranes, these single-cell feelings could be aggregated and communicated to the neural center of a larger organism.